Our next speakers are Paula and Claire. They are campaigners against the decriminalised red light zone in the Holbeck area of Leeds, which is officially known as the managed approach. They are part of the Save Our Eyes community group campaigning against it. Claire has lived a mile from the Holbeck managed approach zone in Leeds since 2006 and has seen street prostitution proliferate and migrate into residential areas since its pilot in 2014. Her family sees soliciting on the street, they are approached outside their home, and she has frequently been kerb-crawled walking to work in the city. She joined with other residents to form Save Our Eyes in 2017 and hold the council to account for letting this experiment increase street prostitution to the detriment of prostituted women and deplete the quality of life for the community. Paula was a founding member of the Save Our Eyes committee in 2017. She joined to represent the interests of future residents in the urban regeneration area of Holbeck. Paula currently lives in another part of Leeds, but intends to move to Holbeck in 18 months' time. She also sits on the Holbeck Neighbourhood Forum board. So thank you, Paula and Claire.
Hello there.
Hello. Yes, so through our presentation, we'll be including some of the pictures that residents see in Holbeck. The name Save Our Eyes came initially from what the residents could see. They were an offshoot of the Save Our Beeston group, which is a neighbourhood next to Holbeck. So you can see that every day the residents were seeing evidence of prostitution, and they also saw the women suffering as well and became concerned. So you can see used drug syringes, used tampons discarded in the streets, used condoms. It's all there really for the children as well. So for clarity, we wanted to start by saying people find it very confusing normally about what is the managed approach. So the managed approach is actually the Leeds-wide prostitution policy. That covers the whole city. So it's about compassion to women, which of course we support. And then it also put in what became the very controversial part of the policy, which was a dedicated area for prostitution. And that's in a physical location, a very small part of the city.
For street prostitution specifically?
Yes, and that's specifically for street prostitution. There are no indoor facilities, there are no toilets or anything else. So, and the council don't own the land. It's owned by other people, but they own the roads, and they say it's supposed to be just kept to the roads. So firstly, we wanted to say what an honour it is to be on the same bill as our hero, Rebecca Mott. Rebecca has really inspired and informed our work now for about 2.5 years or more. And the title of the slide, "I Exited Women Shouting in the Forest," is because I used to read Rebecca's blog and you could tell she was crying when she wrote it, saying, does anybody care what I'm saying? Does anybody listen to me as someone who has survived this industry? And I used to leave her little comments saying, Rebecca, we're listening, we're Save Our Eyes in Leeds. And so, and also the other person that really inspired us and informed us at the very start was Jalna Hanma, who happens to live near us in Leeds. And she got in touch with us when we first came to the media attention. And it was Jalna who helped us see the other side of the story. So the two opposing arguments, which Linda has discussed, and in fact, neither of us have ever seen anything by Linda until today. But surprise, surprise, after months and months of investigation, we've actually come to Linda's point of view, completely independently of her. So there are two opposing arguments. And if you start looking at the subject of street prostitution, you're very quickly informed of the kind of what I call the powers that be, their view. They educate us. They taught us that the women choose to do sex work. You know, it's all the government's fault. It's to do with universal credit. We were told that before universal credit had actually been launched in Leeds. We were told that very few are drug users. We should be more empathetic. You're very mean, you residents. You need to be more empathetic to their wishes and help them work more safely. We were told that the punters were these kind of sweet, lonely single men. You know, they're paying for a professional service, pretty much like going to the barbers. Any resident that deviated from that point of view was pretty much shamed and told that they were mean, uncaring, unsympathetic. When you start digging a little bit deeper, so the sort of attitude is that you accept the first argument and you don't look any closer. But when you do start to look closer, because there were things that we could not reconcile, things that we saw that did not fit with the first model, such as the suffering of the women and the crying of the women, saying they hated their lives and they hated their jobs. Those things could not be reconciled with the first model. We then discovered that there was another way of viewing this, which is that the women are pretty much forced into prostitution, often from childhood or at the latest teenage years, and that they had largely addiction problems and mental health problems and were effectively trapped. We also discovered that the punters really were not these very sweet single men. They were actually, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it because it'll slip out later if I don't say it now, perverts. I'm sorry, if you're a punter, yeah. So they pay to physically and mentally abuse the women. It's nowhere near, it cannot be compared to going to the barbers in any way. And we discovered that many of the men are actually married, or they've got partners who don't know that they're visiting prostituted women. Now, we want to make it clear that there are a small number of women engaged in sex work in Leeds who are in category 1. But what we're talking about is the women who are prostituted on the streets of Holbeck, and they're really in a much more difficult position. They are in category 2. So thankfully, Linda's covered quite a bit of this, but Linda, I hope you're happy that we discovered this for ourselves. So the primary reason driving prostitution in Holbeck and nationally is that there is actually a high demand by men for the sale and purchase of sex, and that it's all part of a commercial sexual exploitation. We got this from the NHS Glasgow website, so I don't know if you wrote that, Janice. Sorry, Linda. So yeah, we've interviewed many of the women. We've also been fortunate to work with women who have exited life in Holbeck Street prostitution. They told us the same things that we found on the NHS Glasgow website, that they'd experienced abuse in their past life. Including child abuse. In fact, one very brave woman who we worked with for a long time was called Jenny. She said in talking to the others, she did not discover a single one who hadn't suffered childhood sexual abuse or in their teenage years. Some are homeless, some end up moving out of homes and onto the streets of Holbeck because their addiction is so out of control. It is the only way they can fund it. They basically just fall off the bottom of the ladder of life. And again, from NHS Glasgow, we came to believe that prostitution, rather than a choice made freely, was survival behaviour. And we also came to believe that it could not be described as work. We could not find any women who we could legitimately describe as undertaking legitimate employment. So this is one of the screenshots from our website. It's one of the few screenshots that probably doesn't include a quote from Rebecca Mott. we wanted to say that the views of the abolitionists are not fringe views. These are widespread views around the world. We've got a chap who led prostitution in Germany, the German police. He says it's a total lack of freedom for countless women. It's sex slavery. And even, to my surprise, Pope Francis speaking to the United Nations. Now, we are not a religious organisation. There's nothing to do with religious or religious talk at Save Our Eyes. So it is interesting that even the Pope says it's a crime against humanity. So what's going on in Leeds?
Hi, it's Claire here. I was going to explain from a resident's point of view what we'd experienced with the migration of street prostitution across South Leeds, because it is quite often reported that street prostitution has been in South Leeds, for the entire, for all of history. And although there are pockets of Holbeck and Hunslet where street prostitution and brothel houses have been for many, many years, the problems that inspired the managed approach weren't prevalent 20 years ago. In fact, street prostitution in Leeds was actually based around a park in the north of Leeds, and community leaders there joined forces about 20 years ago, and they moved they heavily policed the street sex scene there, and it popped up again in the centre of Leeds at the Corn Exchange, which is right in the centre of Leeds. And as Leeds slowly redeveloped over the following decade, the street prostitution that had been in the sort of the dark car parks around the Corn Exchange started to migrate south along the river, then crossing over the river into what was industrial Holbeck. And there it settled for some time. The financial crash happened, and it meant that industrial Holbeck was left fallow for quite a long time, and street prostitution was able to embed itself there over a long time. But as development projects carried on there, Holbeck Urban Village and Bridgewater Place were built. And so the street prostitution industry started to be pushed through industrial Holbeck. And as sort of street lights popped up and security cameras went up, punters started to want to go to the more discreet and sort of dark and desolate places. And so there was a natural migration through industrial Holbeck. Except that the next area that you come to after that is the residential area of Holbeck, which we can see here. If you look below the blue circle, is that the dense terraced houses is the residential area of Holbeck. Now, the blue line designates the managed approach zone. And within that is a lot of businesses that are running mainly during the day, but many businesses that have deliveries and stuff running through the night there. So it's always an industrial zone, and it's never completely closed down. So the companies there, the businesses within that area, have to learn to live with street prostitution amongst them and the detritus that is left in the mornings afterwards. So what this map really shows is that once the managed approach zone was set up in 2014, it legitimized street prostitution and commoditized the girls, and that we went from approximately 40 street prostituted women working in Holbeck in 2014 at the beginning of the managed approach, but now we have 140 prostituted women working the managed approach, and therefore the geographical zone became too small to accommodate that many punters coming to the area. And the yellow pins on the map here, really, these pins denote where sex litter and drug litter has been found. And that is because punters were picking up girls within the blue circle of the managed approach, but not being able to find anywhere to actually complete their transaction, and therefore traveling way into residential areas to actually have sex with the prostituted women in front of people's houses, in parks, cemeteries, all over the place. And therefore the community were not only witnessing sex acts and violent acts towards women, but also in the morning taking their children to school and having to step over used condoms and needles in the morning as we went on our way. But I mean, in 2017, there was a real flashpoint where we saw women, you know, falling into moving traffic in the mornings. You know, it seemed to be a sort of a drug use change where we were having to pick girls up from the roadside and phone charities and phone the police and try and get stuff sorted out. So the yellow pins in this picture really shows how far outside the managed approach street prostitution had proliferated.
And just to point out as well that these houses are largely back-to-backs. It's a relatively impoverished area, so the children actually don't have anywhere to play other than the parks, but because of the drug litter and the needles in the parks, the parents just can't let them out alone. They have to go and check the children's play area first. And so I'll just show you the rules of the managed approach. So on paper, it looks like something that could have worked, but in practice, it doesn't work because the drug addiction rates are so high that the women really can't get it down into overnight hours. So the hours are slightly different now. These were the original rules. But it's just been an impossible feat to try and keep it under control, either in the area where it's supposed to be or in the hours that it's supposed to be. There's no real aspect of it that works well. So these are general shots. This is a woman here. That's a mini roundabout in the centre of the residential area at St Matthew's, and they stand on the corner, and sometimes it's quite closely near misses with the traffic. They jump out, or they actually try and get into these cars because they're so desperate for the money to buy their next lot of drugs that they will jump into cars that pull up at the roundabout. So yeah, I mean, everybody had a story. It was 12-year-old girl wearing a school uniform. I mean, the number of schoolgirls approached, you would be shocked, and quite young children. You know, the youngest on record is actually a grandmother who was asked to hand over a 4-month-old baby to a punter. Then this one here's just from 2 weeks ago. This is a lady's 14-year-old son was propositioned when going to the corner shop. So again, this isn't in the zone. This is in the centre of residential Holbeck at the corner shop when you think, okay, lad, go get me some milk. And he's stopped and offered sex for a £5. One of the most shocking cases that really spurred the residents into action was a resident in the Barms. The Barms are quite close to the zone, and he took his dog for his late night wee, and with his 15-year-old son, walked past a punter and a prostitute having sex on the floor in a fire escape near his house. When asked to move, she threatened to cut my throat, kill my dog and children, and rape my wife, and apparently I was the pervert for shining a torch on them. When he got back to his house, she'd gone to his house and she was at his front door. And she says, I know where you live, I'll smash your windows in. She threatened to burn his house down. For the last maybe 18 months, we've been what we call punter of the week, or powing them. So this one is a punter of the week caught on a residential street having a blowjob in his car. This was outside children's bedroom windows in the early evening. You know, so they're not finding discreet locations. This one's outside the primary school. Literally, the woman who took this video had actually just walked to the school to collect her child at 3 p.m, and he's in the car having sex with a woman at 3:10. It's entitlement, really. The zone has legitimised their idea that they can do whatever they want to whatever woman they can find. So the punters, if you're like an average Holbeck resident, like Claire is when she's walking her kid to school and then home again, 9:30 in the morning, she'll get kerb-crawled because she's a woman and she's out in the street. Therefore, she's fair game. Kerb-crawling all women of all ages. Men also face abuse when declining offers of sex, and that can actually be quite scary. You can read an account by a man called John on our blog, who was followed by a whole troop of people for turning down an offer of sex. Another one, again, just the general abuse that residents face. You'll be able to read all these accounts are on our website. We've spent 3 years collecting accounts from the children and the women of Holbeck. The used condoms, they're given out in various different colours, and the blue and orange ones, they look like balloons. So there are hundreds and hundreds of them, but the sex industry tries to minimise that. They try to silence the residents by saying they're not really there. What you're saying is not true. It's just one condom and one needle taken from different angles. So Bill, who's one of our committee members, you won't be able to read all this, but he actually used freedom of information requests to find out what the council themselves were collecting from the vicinity. And it's coming through at huge numbers. So here, this is around 1,000 items a month collected. Sorry, do you want to...
That was over 3 months. They were finding 1,000 items over 3 months, weren't they?
Yeah, 1,000 items a month per month. Yeah. This is for a different time period. You can see that there's loads in the residential areas, littering the streets. Holbeck Working Men's Club is not even in the zone. 28 found there in a 3-month period. The doctor's surgery, 112 at the doctor's surgery.
So that's a mile away from
that's
the
at Beeston Hill.
Yeah.
Here we've got a nice green balloon or a nice yellow balloon, and you can imagine the look on the mother's face whose child really did pick it up and go, "What's this, mummy?" We see a lot of abuse generally, as Linda was saying, the silencing of the women who have exited, the silence of the residents who've witnessed anything. Any truth must be silenced. So here's Charles Hymas, who travelled to Leeds himself to interview Jenny. Hoax. It's a hoax. Anti-sex work propaganda. Come up with better stories. This is crap. This is from one of our residents where women have been trafficked to the United Kingdom, Romanian women. If you look at the punters forums, you'll see the references to Roms. These are the Romanians. They know these are trafficked slaves.
They are actually being kept in houses around Holbeck. So Holbeck street industry pulls the punters to the area, but then they're redirected to indoor brothels, as well as being able to purchase women directly from the streets. But a lot of houses within the Holbeck area have been used, rented by traffickers and stuff to be used as indoor brothels as well as outdoor.
So you've got the English women, and then you've got mainly what's now Romanians, and they really are trafficked slaves, and they're held in custody, and they're brought into the zone in a minibus with guards. So this is the very brave Jenny, who taught us so much about what was really going on about behind the scenes. So at that time, when this interview was done with Jenny, which I think was probably back in
2018.
Yeah, end of 2018, early 2019. She reckoned there was around 40 to 50
trafficked women.
Yeah.
Out of the 140.
You know, so to be straight, some aspects of the policy have been successful. We're not saying that the whole policy is a disaster. There are aspects like women are more willing to report crimes. They've got to know the police better. There are better relationships between the police and the women, and they're more willing to engage with support services and public health. One thing that's been a huge success in the community is the dedicated cleansing teams. Save Our Eyes is used to hail the scarab machine, which is held in the area. They put photos on Save Our Eyes, say, here's condom, here's a needle, and the little scarab machine, and our trusty steed, he goes around and he collects it. So we've also had better communication between the residents and the police since Save Our Eyes started, which led to the creation of the Voice of Holbeck Committee. But despite this, the residents and the businesses feel the managed approach has not worked. Businesses, some of them that are in the zone, they actually have to let their female staff go home at 4 in the winter, so they don't have to go to the bus stop alone. Why didn't it work? Well, I think there was a kind of a sweet little beliefs, you know, related to the sex work narrative originally. Because they were told that a lot of the women were not on drugs, they clearly underestimated the addiction rates. According to Jenny, addiction rates are at 100%. And according to other agencies as well, there are 95%. There are 3 different agencies that are dedicated to working with women in the zone, and one of them reckons on 100% addiction rates, and the others vary. So because of the drug abuse and the level of drug abuse, which quite often is out of control, they can't stick to the agreed hours. So it was a great idea, but the actual cohort of women that the zone applies to, they can't stick to the hours really. There are some that do, you know, Jenny did. Jenny abided by the rules and everything, but even the women that are like Jenny, they're still drawing in punters from up to 100 miles away. So they've caused a huge rise in on-street prostitution in the Leeds area. So we can't contain the hours, we can't contain the zone, the punters on foot either. There was a sex work advocacy charity housing women in the area, so of course they're given a house, their pimp moves in, they're then forced to work 24 hours a day, and one of our residents was next to a property like that with a poor woman forced to work 24 hours a day. So the policy again backfiring on her, instead of setting her free, the house trapped her. The zone's being portrayed as legal in the UK media, which it's not. Underestimated demand, and then of course underestimated the number of women drawn from neighbouring cities and then also trafficked from different countries.
And that was evidenced in the fact that in 2014, when the managed approach started, there was approximately 40 women involved in street prostitution in Holbeck, and now there's 140. So it's actually tripled the amount of women.
Yeah. And 140 is what they know about, because the trafficked women would never be allowed to engage with the agencies. They're hidden completely. So what do the residents want? So our members at Save Our Eyes, I mean, we represent about 500 or 600 families in the area who are affected. They want an exit strategy with an end date set so that it can be planned for. They want a ban on kerb crawling and punters on foot. They present a huge risk to the women and children of Holbeck. We want help for the women. We're not asking for women to be criminalised or chased or jailed or anything. We do see them as victims. They need addiction services. And one of the things that Jenny said to me that I'll never forget, she said, there isn't a woman working these streets that wouldn't take off your right arm for a place in rehab. You know, and her only way out was through rehab as well. We want the truth to be told, not hushed up. We shouldn't be silenced in the media. We shouldn't be made out to be unsympathetic. We are sympathetic, I mean, it's because we're sympathetic that we want justice for all the women of Holbeck, not just a few. The mystery of the murders, I mean, this is a strange one. The data isn't correct. The data that you're being given in the media is not correct. So we knew we'd had 3 attempted murders in the summer of 2018. And so we put in what do you call it? Freedom of information request. and only one came back, which was the well-known case of poor Daria, who was murdered while it was still a trial. So the 3 attempted murders of the previous summer had all been somehow disappeared.
So I'm going to just say about what happened during lockdown, because I believe that lockdown was a unique opportunity for us to really press the pause button on what was happening in Holbeck, both for the residents and for the women trapped in the managed approach. And that was, you know, a gift really, because never in a million years would we ever get the opportunity to see, you know, well, it wasn't a gift, obviously, COVID and all that, but the opportunity it gave us was to press pause on the managed approach. So as lockdown happened, Leeds City Council obviously had to issue a press release saying that men were no longer welcome to come to Holbeck and visit the managed approach zone during the times or the area, because from social distancing and everything, it would not be safe for the women and the punters to come and mix with each other. And you know, we had for the first month of lockdown especially, the men didn't come to Holbeck at all, which was partly due to the fact that I think a lot of their businesses were shut down, so they didn't have an excuse to sneak away from their homes and visit Holbeck. But I think also people genuinely had a sense of self-safety in staying away during that time. And therefore, the girls were offered, a lot of the girls without accommodation were offered temporary accommodation, and great sort of wraparound care and rehabilitation offered to girls to keep them from going out in the street to earn their drug money and stuff like that. So there was extra interventions put into place for them. And when after lockdown lifted, we were able to see quite obviously that a lot of the girls that we know well that had returned to the streets looked much, much healthier, much sort of looked like they'd had sleep and food and a time of rehabilitation during that time. And since then, we've had the opportunity to speak to the main addiction charity in Leeds, who reported to us that they did see an uptick in women signing up to their services and interventions. And they very, very, you know, the biggest point to me is that they reported that several of our Holbeck prostituted women had actually been able to make the choice to walk away from street prostitution once and for all. Now, during the time of lockdown, the community really strongly felt that they felt much, much safer, because it was so obvious that we didn't have the constant circulation of punters circling and prowling the streets. So for us, we had the unique opportunity to see what would happen if street prostitution was paused in Holbeck. And the evidence, to me personally, was that a lack of punters inspired the women to take a lot more of the services that were offered to them, and that even resulted in some women choosing to exit, and that we simultaneously had a community that felt safer. And for me, you know, what we essentially saw during lockdown was the Nordic approach installed in Holbeck. And that we asked for that policy to be extended, because we really felt that it'd been very beneficial for the women that were able to accept more help, and those ones that were able to exit, and also for the community that felt safer and less litter and all of those things. Unfortunately, since lockdown has lifted, the men have just flowed back into Holbeck, sort of more desperate than ever, and residents are back to being kerb-crawled regularly. And the women that appeared on the street after lockdown looking much more healthy, unfortunately their physical demeanour has already declined because of the level of demand from men returning to Holbeck. So we've asked for Leeds City Council to reissue their their press release telling men that they're not welcome to come to Holbeck. The managed approach hasn't been reinstated since lockdown because social distancing rules means that it's still unsafe for women to have to mix with men from all over Yorkshire coming to visit our area and bringing COVID potentially. In fact, we locked down officially on Friday evening, but there was still men buying women from the street in my area yesterday. So men coming from all over the place, bringing whatever COVID they would like to the vulnerable women of the managed approach and the vulnerable women of our community. So that's it encapsulates what I feel was a really, really good possibility of being able to look at how the Nordic approach would benefit Holbeck, in that the fact that we stopped punters coming and we gave women proper help.
Thanks, Claire. So we've recently had the police, this is our last slide, nearly done. We've recently had an independent review. You'll be able to read more about that on our website, in our blog. And there's also our response to the independent review as well. And I was looking at it again last night, and the last point that we made to the independent review in response to it was that we believe we have witnessed the harmful effects of prostitution on the women who live immersed in it. We believe that prostitution is not like other jobs and can never be made safe. The demand from male sex buyers must be tackled by addressing this issue in schools from the teenage years upwards. Paying to abuse a woman should not be seen as normal or something she enjoys. We have noticed that punters on online forums often have distorted beliefs about the women they buy, such as she must be a sex addict, or she does it for fun, or I'm showing her a good time. Tackling misconceptions about sex work is essential for British society to gradually move on from it. And this is some work of Claire's, which was, and I gave it the quotes of, this is, when we have charities going out and supplying women with the tools of their master's trade, who are they to call us uncompassionate?